Hey guys, Hashi here. Today I wanted to cover one of the biggest misconceptions I see paraded around the community. Today we will be talking about the Deep Warp. Yes, that's right, your favorite Warhammer YouTuber's favorite topic. However, instead of just going over the same lore entry everybody talks about, we will be going in depth into the intricacies and inconsistencies it actually brings upon Warhammer, or in other words, we are debunking the Deep Warp. Before we get into this properly, I'd like to ask that you share this video with your friends. It's 2025 when I'm recording this, and the Deep Warp shouldn't run rampant any longer. I hope this video is an obituary to the theory, and the last word on the matter. So please, if you know anybody who actually does perpetuate this junk, like that there is some Deep Warp that's unknowable, untouchable, just show them this video. Now, a Deep Warp debunk may come as a shock to some of you, given my known affinity for Warhammer's cosmology, but this isn't a backtrack, as some may think. I firmly believe that we should value reasoning, not conclusions, so when people parade around a conclusion that seems right with faulty reasoning, and an even worse reason for believing it, it really grinds my gears. As a community that curates this rich mythos, we should be presenting conclusions based on cited evidence, not just vibes. This video will serve as a sort of part zero to any further cosmological explanations I will end up doing on this channel, since I'd rather not do a deep dive on the endless potential and have people asking about the Deep Warp. This would be the same as the DC scalers who do the whole true form dark side and true form endless are the apex of DC. That is to say, they argue that there is some deeper true warp that no one scales to, is beyond chaos, totally unknowable, super obscure, Reddit soyjack, etc. I've always felt that once you know the motive for an argument, you can better assemble counter-arguments that not only defeat the argument in question, but snuff out the desire to retool the argument. So to start, let's go over the core motive for arguing this unknowable true deep warp. Obfuscation. I've ranted about this in another video, so I'll try to keep it brief. It's when Warhammer lore guys get really mad that someone might know as much, if not more than they do, so they will invent problems, mysteries, and or inconsistencies in the lore to move the goalposts so no one can know more than they do. This becomes evident when people speak about the warp. For years, knowing the basic facts about the warp being bigger than a galaxy or the warp connecting to other universes were fairly niche, so now that they are pretty commonplace, the supposed lore nerds have to invent headcanon to remain superior. So what the lore guys did was claim that everything you could possibly know about the warp was just scratching the surface, and then there's actually a deep warp that's batshit insane. Yeah, I don't really know how to mimic the 2016 40k guys hyping something up, but you get the idea. Anything you could say about the warp doesn't count because there's like a deeper warp that's like totally cool or whatever, and they know about it, but they can't tell you anything about it because apparently no one knows anything about it. This idea of an unknowable area of the warp that dwarfs chaos is wrong for a few reasons. So to start, it has been established that the Chaos Gods are the realms, and that Chaos and the Warp are interchangeable according to almost any Chaos Demons codex, with Chaos having dominance over the Warp, like this quote from the 7th edition core rulebook. This presents obvious issues for the Deep Warp theory. However, this is where the crux of their argument comes into play: the Well of Eternity. The Well of Eternity is something from Kairos Fateweaver's Codex/Army Book entry that alleges that there is a place in the warp where all of space and time come from, and even Tzeentch won't go there, so he sent a greater demon there instead, in this case being Kairos Fateweaver. So the conclusion that people draw from this is that there is this area beyond the warp as we know it in chaos entirely. So to debunk the Well of Eternity, there are really three core points we need to refute. Point 1 is the nature of demons and their place in the warp. Point 2, the nature of the Chaos Gods in the warp. And point 3, where do space and time come from in Warhammer? To start, according to 9th edition Chaos Demons, we know that demons are just extensions of their parent god, so already it is kind of strange to say that a lesser part of Tzeentch would be able to witness this type of thing, but the god itself could not. Beyond that incoherency, demons interact with the whole warp anyways. Demons have been stated to interact with all layers of existence in Descent of Angels, and we have seen that they have to ascend through the planes of existence to even manifest in the materium, like in Warhawk. To compound on this, demons have been flat out said to be born in the depths of the warp anyways, like this quote from Warhammer Conquest. And in the recent Ahriman Undying, we are told that demons when banished are sent back to the depths of the warp. In the 4th edition Chaos Demons Codex, Kugath is stated to distill toxins from the furthest reaches of the realms of chaos. So demons themselves interact with the whole warp, and as we know, demons are just extensions of their gods. Another proof of this would be when Gilman used the Emperor's Sword to burn Nurgle's garden in Godblight. We see that the whole hierarchy of Nurgle demons can feel the wound, and that to wound the garden is to wound the god. This would mean demons and their gods by extension interact with the depths of the warp. This would outright contradict the notion of a deep, unknowable, true warp. If we expand our scope to include anything that mentions the whole warp, it gets even worse for the deep warp theory. In the Winds of Magic supplement for 4th edition Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, we are told that Tzeentch's crystal maze interlaces the whole realm of chaos. In Legacies of Betrayal, we are shown that the patterns of Tzeentch's plans can only be seen from the extremes of existence. We have also been told in White Dwarf Weekly 57 that Khorne is the strongest Chaos God there has ever been, and since Chaos Gods are their realm per 7th edition Chaos Demons, it would mean that Khorne should likewise have comparable territory in the Warp. At this point, I feel I should clarify my beliefs about the Warp and its depths. So the Warp is a sort of hierarchical system where the deeper you go, the stronger you generally are. This is why demons have to manifest down from the warp, as we see in the first wall, where the demon in question is but a tendril from Nurgle's garden that had to burrow through existence to manifest. The difference between layers is shown where we see dimensions fade away into the background when Magnus dips his head below the surface of the warp in his Primarch novella. In Eye of Terror, we are outright told there are infinite layers as well. The warp is said to be made of unformed demons in the first Heretic, and that demons exist in a hierarchy per the Vengeful Spirit. In the Ultimate Guide, we are also told how the Demon Kings work in regards to this hierarchy. Of course, this would mean you can have multiple beings interacting with a layer, so Chaos occupying most of the warp to the extent that they're interchangeable per 7th edition Chaos Demons doesn't mean that the classical gods of fantasy cannot exist or anything like that, it just means that there isn't some magical majority of the warp that Chaos cannot interact with. The second big problem with the Well of Eternity is that we know where space and time come from in Warhammer, and it isn't from the warp or anything like that. Check out my Creation Myth video for more about that. Karnak's entry from the 7th edition Chaos Demons Codex would also mean he is tracking things into the Well of Eternity based on the verbiage of the ends of the materium into the depths of the immaterium. And lastly, the icing on the cake is that if you accept author statements as evidence, John French has outright said that the Well of Eternity isn't real. The next quote people will point out is this one from the Path of Heaven, where we are told about the various layers of the warp. This is where the whole reasoning over conclusions thing comes in, since as we've been over in this video, I do believe the warp has layers and depths, and this quote does in fact support that. However, as we have also been over, I don't think there is a part of the warp that is beyond chaos, and this quote wouldn't prove that either. But people attribute another quote to this that we will talk about in a bit. So in this quote, we are told about how human ships don't normally go deeper into the warp. And more importantly, when talking about the deeper layers of the warp, they say that it is not a mirror. If you didn't notice, nowhere in this quote do they ever mention chaos. None of these ideas presented here are really new ideas. Like we see in The End and the Death, a similar idea of a mirror structure in the warp. This is showing that there is a localized area of the warp and a greater area that isn't really affected by the occurrences of one universe. We also see this in Archaon, Lord of Chaos, where he mentions how the mirror is just the surface of this boundless sea within a sea. And the same narrative is repeated in the Flight of the Eisenstein, how the warp has a mirror area that is really the surface of a deeper thing. The Path of Heaven quote is then followed up with another quote from the same novel, where it is said that the webway is in the depths. And then they follow that up with a quote from Gathering Storm 2, where we see Yvraine go outside of the webway and perceive Tzeentch. These two are used in conjunction as an attempt to add credence to the Deep Warp idea when it really doesn't add anything. We have statements of the webway creating an endless series of pocket realities like the Chasm of Woe from 8th edition Dark Eldar, or connecting to alternate realities like in the 10th edition core rulebook. So, logically speaking, it should be going deeper than the mirror, and it also isn't really a stretch to say yes, it goes a bit deeper into the warp, and because Tzeentch is the warp, he would just be there too. The next quote from the Shadespire novel really talks about the etheric void, but it gets lumped into the deep warp talk quite a bit. Anyways, in this passage we are told that there are swimmers in the etheric void who are older than chaos and don't play with their food. The issue with this quote is that it wouldn't even prove the deep warp in the first place. What the quote talks about is older gods who don't play with their prey anymore. The book says there are other smaller gods that cling to the realms like Remora earlier on. As I am sure you have gathered, this is not some grand proof. The concept of more than 4 chaos gods has been around for years, and it is nothing new. There are statements of infinite chaos gods in Rise of the Horned Rat, or more recently in Arcs of Omen, where we were told about Vastor ruling over the Soulforge with other competitors. We've also been told that the Harrowdeep is a graveyard of the gods, explicitly ones from previous cycles of creation. Needless to say, this quote from Shadespire changes nothing. In conclusion, the whole idea of an unknowable deep warp is a myth. While the warp definitely does have depths and layers, there isn't some big mystery down at the bottom or something like that. My big issue, as I said earlier, is this sort of thing is just used to obfuscate things. Like in a thread I was looking at, someone was trying to attribute other things to the deep warp baselessly. The deep warp becomes this kitchen sink where anything the normies don't know is thrown in. Can't explain where mandrakes come from? Deep warp. Can't explain something from an RPG book? Deep warp. Wonder where your dad went 10 years ago? He must be in the deep warp. To compound upon this weird fascination, people think it's heresy to be skeptical or critical of the theory, as it ruins their magic trick. Like any long-running myth, it wouldn't surprise me if there's some newer one-off quote for this deep warp. Obviously, this would be written by a newer writer who foolishly took Reddit's word for something. This would be inconsistent with all the stuff I presented in this video, but given the special pleading that follows these theories, inconsistency won't matter to the people who believe it. Anyways guys, thanks so much for watching. If you know anybody who believes in the deep warp, please send them this video. And I'll see you all in the next one.